Germany pinched the bridge of his nose, keeping his lips shut as he stifled a yawn at the back of his throat. How long had he been writing on this paperwork? 3, 4 hours at least? And yet there was still so much to do. He quietly sighed, staring down at the organized chaos of paper sprawled out on his desk with slowly blurring eyes. It must have been 2 in the morning, and he was only part way done. When was this going to end? He set his hands on the desk and pushed himself up, stifling another yawn, and he stretched his arms above his head. He smacked his lips dryly as he unbuttoned his uniform jacket, sidestepping and grabbing the hanger before walking over to hang it up. As he did, he took a glance to the stand-up mirror near his dresser, going over to it to look over his complexion. This new amount of workload was taking a very large toll on him, already robbing him of much-needed sleep which could be shown with the darkness beginning to show under his eyes. He shook his head, frowning at the sight of himself. With a simple roll of the eyes, he turned back around and sat back in his seat, rubbing his eyes before picking up his pen and continuing his work by the light of the desk lamp, the only light in the room. When was this going to end? While Germany had left to go to his work, his reflection stayed close to the mirror, looking over to where the other was sitting with brows curved upwards in worry. It looked down to its hands, tapping them together in thought before up to the clock. Germany was up way past his bedtime. He had been for the past week. He needed to relax. He needed to sleep. With a silent snap of the fingers, the reflection looked up with a soft smile, stepping forward to step a foot outside of the mirror's surface. As it pulled itself in the real world, its form became semi-transparent, becoming slender and smaller. The partly green uniform dyed itself blue and added more layers on itself, and finally the reflection's hair ruffled out and faded into an auburn color, a long curl daintily hanging near his left ear. Carefully, he stepped out to where the German was sitting, looking over his shoulder to see what was being worked on. Paperwork, paperwork, paperwork. Boring. Without missing a beat, he set his faded hands on Germany's shoulders and pressed down on them, a grin coming up at a small, heavy breath of relief coming from the blonde. What? Germany mumbled, before he looked upwards, blinking once or twice at seeing Italy's smiling face looking down at him. He rubbed his eyes, swearing that he could almost see through him. Maybe he really was tired. What are you doing here? I swear I locked it. All right. You always get in. He gave an almost exasperated sigh as he looked down to his desk. If you're going to sleep in my bed, go do it. I still have paperwork to do. Italy frowned at this, almost forming into a pout at being rejected. Those endearing smiles soon returned as he massaged into Germany's shoulder once more, earning him a small from the other. The other seemed to try to ignore him for a while, trying to keep working, but the other's motions into his shoulder felt too good to just shrug off. Italy, knock it off, he said sharply, looking back up to him, though was caught a little off guard at the smile Italy held towards him, warm and kind, almost like a mother's. Where did that come from? Well, if you're going to stay in my room, go do something else. You're distracting me. The other slowly nodded understanding, pulling his hands away and letting the other go back to work. He had to get creative. To think about what to do, he walked around the room silently, his boots not making a single thud against the hardwood floors under him. What was soothing in this area? There was no way he could have music playing, or something soft for the blonde to hold. What other senses could he affect? After a while of walking around, he paused in front of the window, seeing the full moon against all the dots of stars and how it poured light into the room. What season was it again? Summer? Yeah, it seemed like summer. This could work. He reached out and gently unlatched the lock, pushing the door open and letting the warm summer night breeze float into the room, rustling the curtains ever so lightly. Germany wrote down a few more sentences in his paper before he noticed, feeling a light wind on him and the smell of outside permeating into the room. He took a deep breath of the cool breeze, setting down his pen before looking up to the window. He opened his mouth to try to question why the window was open, but he slowly shut it at seeing Italy sitting at the windowsill, staring up to the moon. He could have sworn the moonlight was passing right through him. Italy? Italy looked over to his captain, giving him a happy smile, motioning his head to the outside, almost as saying, "Quite a night, isn't it?" Germany furrowed his brow a little bit, but raised them slightly as Italy reached out his hands, making a grabbing motion with his hands in a way to ask him to come over. With a heavy sigh, Germany stood up from his chair and went over next to him, looking outside. He looked upwards, muttering a soft "ooh" at seeing the moon high above in the night sky, illuminating the peaceful sleeping town. He jumped very lightly as he felt something against him, Looking over to see Italy was very lightly leaning against him, just contently smiling and staring out into the night, his eyes brightened by the moonlight so much they almost seemed to be blue. The German pursed his lips as he looked down to the other for a while, before he simply sighed. "All right, enough. Close the window, it's going to get chilly in here. I have to get back to work," he stated before just simply closing the doors himself and turning around back to his desk. Italy slightly huffed at this in a bit of frustration. Gosh, he was so stubborn! He stood up to his full height and crossed his arms, frowning as he thought about what to do. He was working himself to the bone, the poor thing. He needed to sleep. With an inaudible sigh, he continued to walk around the room, just looking something Germany would approve of. He slowed his pace as he noticed some items put out of the place on his dresser, deciding to just set them straight. He tapped his chin in thought, but blinked as he heard a flutter of papers behind him. Verdammt. Germany cursed under his breath, shifting a hand through his hair, as now everything he had somewhat organized was now just in a mess on the floor. Italy tilted his head, but quickly went over, very carefully picking up stray papers that had fallen off the desk and organizing them back where Germany could reach them. The blonde blinked at this, not having expected him to come and help. His brows furrowed at seeing the other's expression, looking very close to sad and disappointed. Huh? He was upset about something. Was that why he was being a mute? Germany decided to watch him as he left the desk side, seeing him go over to his bed and carefully climb onto his bed. Italy gently set himself on top of the covers of Germany's bed, straightening out the blankets and taking the pillows into his arms. He grabbed both ends and proceeded to quickly just fluff them up, smiling lightly when it was just the right amount of fluffiness. He looked up once he set them back, noticing the German was staring at him. He gave a hopeful smile, patting the pillow he just set down in a motion of, "It's nice and fluffy now." Germany raised an eyebrow towards the other before he sighed, reaching over to flick off at the lamp. "All right, fine, you win. I suppose if I wake up early enough I can finish this before the meeting." Italy grinned like no other at the other's acceptance, bouncing up and down on the bed before just flopping down on it, reaching his arms out again in a grabbing motion with a wide smile on his face. Germany couldn't help but chuckle at the other's simple excitement, surprised the other wasn't stripping off his clothes in a heartbeat. He sat on the bedside and undid his boots, simply tossing them aside before settling into his side of the bed, realizing he was face to face with the calmly smiling Italian. This was nice. He couldn't pinpoint why, maybe because he was finally taking a break, but it was nice. "Italy?" Italy tilted his head questioningly, open to anything he had to say. "Thanks for coming in here. If I stayed up long enough to do that paperwork, I probably wouldn't have slept. Then I really would have been unprepared for the meeting." The Auburn land shied away a little at the gratitude, coyly smiling up at him before just snuggling more into the pillow below him. Germany cracked a light smile at this, feeling his eyelids begin to feel heavier and heavier. Before he completely shut them, he noticed a flicker of darkness seemed to take over Italy's left side of the face, his eyes seeming to change to a bright white and blue for just a moment. But with a blink, the odd vision was gone. Italy tilted his head curiously, brows tilting up as if silently asking if something was wrong. The German's lips pursed once more in confusion, but just stifled a yawn. "Gute Nacht, Italian," he stated before he just finally let his eyelids close and to relax. Italy mouthed a good night to his captain, watching as the blonde untensed and fell into a peaceful sleep. He never grew tired of watching that. Carefully, he leaned upwards and gave a soft kiss to Germany's forehead, closing his eyes as he just relished the moment. "Good night, friend. You've worked really hard. You deserve rest." He opened his eyes, his pupil and iris having now disappeared, darkness consuming his false form and beginning to slowly delve into Germany's body through the slightly ajar mouth. It didn't take but a minute or so until the German was left in his empty bed, dead to the world with a soft smile on his face. "Let's have sweet dreams together, Captain. Let's play!"